All right, cool. We're
There we
recording.
go. We're in.
We're live.
We're officially live.
We're
We're
live
in the quote
in the
unquote studio.
studio. Yes. Well, what's weird is we're in the studio. We're normally in the studio,
Right.
and now we're also in camera. Yes.
Yeah.
Here,
We're on our beautiful sound place here for this is made.
it clearly you can tell by the audio quality that all the walls are treated. The yellow is not drywall. It's town shrine.
Yes.
You just can't tell on camera, and we forgive you. We forgive you for doing that. But you're bad judgment. But I suppose with that, welcome to Zero Distraction. Like we got two camera angles here if you're watching on YouTube, so we're getting very fancy with our onboard cameras there. But Zero Distraction is a podcast about first time founders create companies that scale. Regular co-host now, so you have no guests today. I'm JDM and Cam, Josh David Miller. I facilitate the launch and scale of startups and other assorted things, subdivisions.
Sundays. He always has to drop huge one. But needs and always needs looking up. But it's can't Cam Lowe back in the studio with the man of many big words.
As you can see now, since we need to be like a feedback, so the camera catches both of us, you can't be like looking up the words. Well, I'm just going to start. I'm just going to go full set alien right now and just drop all everything always lab that can grasp my fingers around. I think we're going to end that joke there.
You're not.
I'm going to for the the founder edition of the Zero Distraction podcast. Now, this is interesting because this is a phraseology and timeline that you and I use. I think we probably have mentioned it on the show before, but we use it a lot is with founders. We'll tee us up, and then we'll have a conversation around what amounts to the founder relationship with their startup.
Awesome. So really this kind of like framework that we mentioned, I think in a few episodes, but we're going to dive in and unpack a little bit more, particularly as we look at the fundraising journey and how your process is ultimately to move from this founder only to founder led and then ultimately founderless. And so as you're thinking about building your model, right, oftentimes the founder is the driver of the engine of the business, and oftentimes maybe leveraging their networks to get those first sales and demonstrate that customer traction, right? And so as we look at this, how do we then morph this down, team wrapping it up and supporting them, and then ultimately path to founderless? And that's kind of why we teed it up as Fire the Founder Edition. How can you bring in that support and ultimately build that engine that ultimately grows? And when you tie that fundraising, we often talk about, well, the risks are, how do you build this actual engine to get more and more customers? And if it continues to be founder only, it's not really that scalable startup, right? A VC, they just invest in your network that might have limited capacity ultimately grow. And you have to demonstrate traction and evidence along that process to say, you know what, I'm moving from just only me making sales. Now we have a team, we have a repeatable process, we have a clear go-to-market strategy and these tactics that we're going to use. So then here's how we're ultimately, likely around the Series A level, we got this engine that's growing. All we need to do is start shoveling the cash into this engine that would allow us to get that 10x return and ultimately see it grow from there. And so that's kind of what we want to dive in deeper of, kind of that continuum to, maybe fire yourself as the founder, but also maybe how they tie to these different fundraising rounds. So that's kind of what I'll tee up for the combo here and turn it back to you, JD.
Yeah, I think the first thing, like level setting that I'll say, is that this journey from founder only to founder led to founderless is not one journey. It's a journey across all of the various roles, responsibilities, and competencies that your startup has. So at the beginning, it is literally just you and your co-founders, if there are any. It might just be solo you in the early days, and you have to do literally everything. And then over time, you could start bringing in hired guns to do things, employees, and those employees can do things under your leadership, which would be founder led. So you're still pretty heavily involved in that process. And then eventually they're doing it entirely without any direct day-to-day supervision of the job itself. And so obviously that can happen, that will happen in all the various aspects of the startup, and they'll all happen at different times. Does that bring that puzzle like of, what is the VC investing in the company, like a little bit in terms of the activities that the fund is like over that period of time, and how is that going to translate to the best use of resources? So that'll differ. It might be that we actually need to really amp up engineering for this for this next round, and so we're going to keep sales still pretty founder led at that point. Or it might be like we need to really fire up sales, so we're going to do pretty founder led, but we're going to bring in some outside sales help to kind of do this, and so the CTO is just going to still be carrying the brunt of the engineering or some combination thereof. So
Yeah, I think tying it kind of back to one of the anchor things that we like to talk about is like, what is the milestone you're trying to reach with that round? And then where are you situated within this founder only, founder led, or founderless process, right? And so it's like, how then are you articulating in this next round of funding that, okay, our intention with, say, we're trying to really focus on the sales and traction was, well, we're going to use these funds to bring on an additional team to move away from this process where it's just me and a couple of other people. We're actually building out the whole teamwork to ultimately be able to, have customer success and build that engine for, referrals and growth in that particular fashion. And so, as you're thinking of this kind of, we talked, I think maybe an episode or two ago around kind of the triangle for fundraising, right? And so it's, what are you investing in terms of that milestone, but then how are you communicating what role those funds play, and like how you're being intentional to ultimately move across this continuum of the founder only to founderless process. And, I guess it's not a vertical of the business, but a component of the business that you're ultimately making that investment.
totally. So, like, just for maybe structure sake for the rest of this conversation, so we have uh, the individual journeys, which might be worth talking about, like how you go about making a decision of when the founder needs to jump out or play less of a role. I think in some of the individual roles, and then we have like the broader. There's a narrative component that we both touched on a couple of times about how that ties to the use of funds in your pitch and VC. So I don't know which one.
I think, but I like the order that you are going in. I think that makes sense.
All right. Well, let's, rather than like go into the weeds, I'll pick maybe a couple of roles. So I think one, sales, really important one to talk about. And then engineering might be another one that makes sense to talk about. Um, I think maybe a broader product. I think it's probably like
Yeah.
broader product. Maybe any others want to?
No, I think part of it will be as you're making decisions in that process, you're going to see where, we were just having a conversation with a founder where there might be using an element around sales, but while doing the invoice and all the admin related to it, right? And so it's like, what is the cost benefit analysis? So I think those are good first for the conversation. So take it away and start with the sales and get into more of the like technical product development components.
I think in a lot of ways, the sales one is the one that trips people up the most and the most straightforward. And it's because it's tied to all of those things that usually all the bugaboo that trip founders up, right? So it's like there's that line between customer discovery and customer validation, which is super blurry to most people most of the time. And then you also have like, well, no, I'm not a sales expert. Let's say you're not a founder with a lot of sales experience. And it's like, well, now I need sales help so that I can kind of sell this thing. And so I think it's one that ends up tripping up, a lot of people like, where am I in this process? And I feel like, oh, but I think it's actually the most straightforward because it's like, it's one of those where like, until you have a repeatable process of sales, until sales start looking the same, until you're like clearly identifying the customer so that when you get them on the phone, you know exactly how many are going to convert, you know how those conversations go and how the conversions work. Right? Until you have that, you really can't offload it to anything else for two reasons. For one reason is that you're basically hiring them without setting them up for success because you're not going to know really what's going to work and convert. And the other problem is that if you don't know what's converting, you don't know if you have product market fit. So if you don't know if you have product market fit, then you actually put a salesperson in a position to have to sell things that may not be sellable to that customer in that way. And the difference between a salesperson and a founder is the salesperson cannot make kinds of decisions that the founder can to pivot through things and offer one-offs and do things differently. So you're actually just setting yourself up for failure by hiring this.
Right. Well, yeah, and there's probably less like learning that can come back. Like, oh, here's the
Right.
conversation versus like maybe the founder pivot the conversation in a way was like testing something different versus having, oh, I had 10 of the same conversations and there was, outside of maybe just filling what the conversation is, but you weren't able maybe to experiment the way that a founder in that kind of, founder led portion of sales or something might actually be able to like unlock some new learning along that process.
Right.
One of the things that made me think of, and maybe, if you have a way to connect it to this journey, was like where my mind went was like pirate metric, right? It was like if you can't like, press the button and say, okay, I think the conversion, I know the conversion rate's going to be 10% just based on historical evidence, right? You're probably in the earlier stages of that founder only, founder led journey of things versus kind of, when you feel like you have that, clear engine for growth, if you see those pirate metrics where you have, you know, confident metrics along that continuum to say, okay, we know when we get, someone on this, we have a 10% conversion rate. So if we get 100 calls in or 100 demos, we're going to get the 10% of those.
Totally. Yeah. 100%. And well, like then that makes a question or like a move a lot of others asking thing like, what, what do you do when sales aren't your expertise and you don't have that and you need like help or you feel like you need help in order to start like closing more deals? Like where's the balance? I thought they,
No, you go first. I'll follow you.
okay. So I think a couple of things. One, when you're in the really early stages, I think one of the mistakes founders make is trying to do sales when there's discovery and validation, right? So discovery and validation are different. And so we try to jump the gun on that. You're just you're engaging in the wrong activity and it's not very productive. So I think that's like, are you even in a position where sales is a thing? Then when sales becomes a thing, is it sales strategy or is it the tactical parts of sales? Because those are two very different things that you could be struggling with. You can be struggling with both. I'm not a salesman, right? So you could be struggling with both. So when it comes to sales strategy, that's where advisors and investors and other people in your network come into play because it can really help you out. Being like, well, when you're doing this kind of B2B sale, this is what tends to work, this kind of thing that tends not to work. And make sure you have the decision maker in the room. They're usually not the person that, they're going to give you that. So that's great. Right? You can get that kind of strategic help. And then when it comes to like the tactical help, I think there's a chunk of that that's you kind of have to learn it by doing it. It's all different. And then there's a lot of tools and tooling, that can help you. And then you can incrementally get in more and more help as you move from like founder only to founder led. Like you could start getting with appointment bookers, right? So like, exactly who you need to get, who you get in front of. You can have help in getting, securing those calendar meetings and get people to have either early conversation or cold outreach and responsible for getting calendars and that. And then slowly over time, like that spectrum of like a scope of responsibilities just starts to expand until eventually you can have a salesperson who is responsible for having the initial conversation, getting people on the call with you. And you guys are working that together. So somebody who's responsible for the practical aspects of sales, they'll do all the follow-up and everything else to get proposals out, whatever. But then you are still the, like the founder who's, leading the conversation as the expert, almost like a sales engineering or a vision.
Yeah. Like kind of like, I would see it as like maybe visioning and like probably almost articulating more of just like what the high level value proposition and how they might lead you versus the like, some of the tactical, objection handling or those things that are maybe a core skill set. That would be maybe what a founder might not have.
Totally. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. So, so that's sort of how I would think about like that is like, where are you in that process and what is actually the kind of help that you need? And then as you start getting that, and there's actually another piece of this as well. That if you're a founder that does not have a lot of sales experience, is uncomfortable with the sales process, you might need a co-founder with that skill set. Mm-hmm. Like there's a set of core competencies that any startup needs to have. And I'm forgetting like there was 3 titles, right? There was the like the visionary, the engineer, and
yeah. There's like call it like marketing, but that's I think there's probably subsets under that, and that's actually kind of what I was thinking. Was you might be a sales founder, and you're like, I just can't get in front of the customer, right? And that's more of a go to market clear understanding where you need more of that customer discovery, validation individual who's not just meeting someone trying to sell them things that they don't have actually any of the like legwork to ultimately sell the product or service, right? And so I think those two can go really hand in hand in the early stages. So,
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, so I think like making sure that you actually have that competency on your team. And if you don't, like that's just as big, if not a probably no, I'm not actually saying that's probably a bigger obstacle for the founders in the reverse position and think they need a CTO.
right.
Like, well, in your like, oh, I have to have a technical co-founder. I think you can get pretty far along in the process if you're able to sell, right? If you're able to do all that validation work before you build everything.
Right.
Whereas like the reverse isn't true. If you lead with building everything, then you're
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, we always talk about trying to change the narrative around build it and they will come, right? Where are they coming to,
right.
and all the things related to that. So maybe, you know, transitioning to that conversation, if you don't mind teeing us up on kind of the journey from and I really make sense the technical engineer and product development in the same conversation, or maybe they're two different ones. But as we think of kind of this founder only to the founder list journey in that process, where are some of those, choke points, and like, where are founders making that decision? Obviously it's, again, if we're taking kind of this framework of not to build an outcome, another way we talk about it is love the problem, not the solution. So it's like, it's not just build it to build it, but having that intentionality to build things that we're getting validation in the market that we should be building because it actually solves urgent and important pain points for our customers. I'll have you take it away from your own that journey. Follow up.
Yeah, I think there's two tracks, product track, engineering track that are just like very tightly, intertwined. And they all right, but like they're almost easier to talk about separately, even though you really can't separate them out. So like on the product side, this is really originally like so obviously a founder thing. It's like, what is the product?
Right.
What's the value proposition? Who we survey, and like, and how does that happen? All that stuff. That's so obviously. And then when you get much further along, you're going to end up needing product help, like in the form of a product manager or chief product officer, something like that. Oftentimes that's the CEO, sometimes the CTO is doing that. Like that can vary based on expertise. But within product is always the intersection of three things. Always the intersection of business, of technology, and of experience. Right? It's always or design or whatever it is that you want to call that.
Yeah.
Third, yeah. So like there's always those three competencies, and so at different points in time, those are going to evolve. Like in the really, really basic startup, you might, hack some prototypes together and, do that kind of thing. Eventually you may need some engineering.
Right.
Right. And then on the the UI UX side, you probably can get away in the early days with having an engineer that can do a good enough job, use some off the shelf libraries, some like Tailwind or Bootstrap or whatever, to actually get you, to a place where it's like, it may not be the slickest app ever, but it's good, right? It's good. It's good enough for early adopter who really has the problem. And then eventually you're going to need like a designer who does that. You can do component libraries and like consistent branding and like all that stuff becomes more important the more like close to the chasm that you get. Definitely, like
Right.
across the chasm. And the business one is really just that more pure product thing. Eventually, get manager.
Yeah. The two things that came to mind, one was like, it made me think of like, as sophistications of your experiments grow, you need more capacity to deliver in that one, in terms of actually like designing and building this experiment. And then also, you need more to like take in the evidence and then create that next iteration. And so as you're thinking of like, okay, the proof points are getting, we're proportioning, as you'd say, our investment, and that could be time, energy, money, to the evidence that we have. So the further we're along in that process, as we are portioning a bigger investment, we're going to need more and more capacity and ultimately support in that process. And then the other thing that kind of came to mind was, as we think of like this product space, if the founder doesn't really take that mindset of like learning, they could be in their own way at founder only stage, right? Where it's like never really get going because they're so, this is the way the product needs to be. I just got to find the right customer that this solution maps to their problem, versus being on the other side of really focusing on the problem, you can see where that would get in their way. And so sometimes having that outside advisory support to change that mindset could be valuable. So those are just the two things that, were tangential to that
Mhm.
process that I wanted to share.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll kinda add on to that, like on the timeline that I see a lot. So for product management, like chief product officer, usually that happens, for like your average SaaS company at least, when the founder has to go full-time fundraise. So think, Series A, Series B. Like at that point, like the founder just can't do that work anymore, and you
Right.
have to offload that. But like what that means, like if you think about business, technology, and designer, UI, UX, like the whole role, user experience is pretty broadly construed here, but not just like literally the clicks and animations stuff. But like if you think about like that's a huge amount of accountability, right? That person has that they're taking off the founder's plate. And so at that point, you're not necessarily exiting startup mode, but you're getting a lot closer
Mhm.
to company building, right?
Right.
Then you are like like definitely in customer creation. You're not in the early discovery and validation stages
Right.
before substantivity. And so because you're not, like you have to be far enough along that it makes sense to offload that to somebody who has a true expertise in those fields. So like that's kind of, and then when it comes to engineering, I think that's much more that just geared toward what were the competencies at the outset. So sometimes you have a CTO or I'll say a tech. So sometimes in the early stage, a technical founder, been a technical founder before, or has immense technical expertise, and they can kind of move into that CTO role and then be fine.
Mhm.
And then all you're doing is hiring talent underneath them and can grow that team out. Other times, you have people who have engineering game, but really don't have the chops to be a CTO because that's like of a growing sort of a high growth startup. 'Cause that's a whole thing. And so technical founder then needs to hire a CTO,
Right.
and bring in that CTO and then support in different capacity, and that creates all kinds of interesting relational dynamics within the company. But that's where the part of the founder.
Yeah. Step aside and I'm the now I report to that person. But sometimes
Would you
you know
rather?
I guess the like other side of that coin is like, would you rather stay the CEO and not actually grow the level that the company wants to be? And so there's probably some realization within that process. But those are hard decisions for sure. As we're all humans and look to try to build and see ourselves in certain positions for sure. So
Yeah. The founders in that position, like all founders are in that same psychological position, I think.
yeah, and I mean, I think we've talked a lot about bringing on advisory support, and those are some questions to like think through. And do I have the you know certainly have the confidence to step into those roles if you think you can. But if that's something where like, hey, you know I can maybe grow under this person, and then that's ultimately maybe what I work my way into. Might for the best of the startup into that company that ultimately does hit the success that you want to have.
Yeah, and like I think we have to have the humility to know what our limits are, right? And limits are. So like if you're on the business side, if you're the business oriented product sales um, kind of founder, that doesn't mean that you can lead a large company, right? Or a high growth company. Look, those are two very different things. It's very rare in the real world to have a founder, start a company ground up and then be leading it when it goes IPO. Like that's super, super rare. We all that like that's the default because like the Mark Zuckerberg types in the world, but that's super, super rare. And so that's where like the phrase find the founder actually comes from. Is that like there comes a point when the startup out founder, because founding is its own skill set. It's
Right.
different. And this is where like I often you've heard me talk this joke before, where I talk about the efficiency part, like, oh, that's the easy part. You just hire some MBAs for that. And I think I would like MBAs can
Figure outable.
let's figure out what MBAs are. And no offense to the MBA, but
He says I bring bureaucracy to our pictures together. Isn't before our time.
which is
We already
great.
have this,
Yeah,
relationship.
that's right. That's right. But I think like to assume that the person who was really good at entrepreneurship is also the same person as like running a large company,
Mhm.
I think undervalues the entrepreneurship. Like small business, like startups aren't small versions of big businesses. And that's why large scale companies don't have startups. They put money into startups
Right.
because they'll almost always fail unless you can go like full skunk works, which is almost impossible.
For sure. Yeah. The last point, then maybe we kind of,
Yeah.
turn, if we can finish up with the narrative component and then wrap up. But was, I think one of the things to do is when you're taking that personal like audit is you might not actually find enjoyment in that work. If you like enjoy just building and like you're excellent on the engineering side, when you get up to that CTO and there's more of the like, strategy and all of that, you might be like, oh, I don't enjoy work at all. Same on the like, maybe you just enjoy, making sales and, that kind of whole process versus, maybe making, setting the vision of where we're going and all those things. And so thinking about that is that actually might align your or personal passion and drive as well. And so that's part of that personal audit as you're.
Yeah, definitely. So like you brought up this narrative component early on. So like maybe you can tee us up. Yeah.
Yes, I think kind of bringing us back to, part of the founder only founder list, part of it was, oftentimes, particularly on the Zero Traction podcast, we're talking about kind of your way to build this scalable startup, and capital is usually needed to a degree in this process. And so it's, as we're looking at these milestones, how are we articulating this narrative and story of how we're deploying capital to ultimately maybe move things out of our, founder only or founder led into these different components of this kind of journey that we've been talking about here today. But a lot of it ties to like, what is the milestone? And, oftentimes people are saying we're using funds to bring on a sales team. Well, there's more impact, right? To say, hey, well, we have evidence now that this engine we're building for growth is key. And so our goal is to get to, X million in ARR. Well, that just can't be a founder only or even probably founder led component of things, right? So it's like we're pulling, let's just say me out of the day to day, and we're actually employing this team with these tactics that we know are working because here's how our hire metrics and everything ultimately works in this alignment. And so the impact of telling that story will have that higher conversion, we would believe, in the fundraising process. And so as you're thinking about it, maybe we can do, if you want to do a quick hit on kind of the sales, product, and engineer of kind of, if a story comes to mind, what that looks like for you. But ultimately, the intention is how are you articulating decisions and how funding would ultimately allow you to move across that journey. That means you're getting closer and closer to that company building as you're going forward.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I don't know how valuable it is to do separate stories for each of them, but I think it's because it's going to all come down to the same thing at the
Yeah.
end of the day, right? I- it's like we're going to get to here and we're going to do that in Y time. And in order to do that, that's going to take Z dollars.
Mhm.
So that becomes the ask. And everyone else is almost just like falls from that. It's like, what do we need in order to do that? And to me, like the most important part of the narrative component is actually being able to articulate the milestone that you're getting to.
Mhm.
A lot of it will say like, oh, we're our runway's getting short, so we're gonna need some to raise some money for the next 6 months. So, like, but why?
As we're burning lunch,
Because we're burning burning it all, dollar bills, y'all.
set it on fire.
Yeah, and it's like, whereas if there's a huge difference between that and saying like, we want to bring on 5 engineers because we need to get to like, we want to make this particular progress in the market. If we're going to do that, it's going to require, this additional product, and it's very tied to that. I actually get like to say maybe a bad story, which would be as an alternative. On the engineering side, I see this all the time where they just say, "Oh, we're raising X dollars, and we're gonna put 500K into product." Or in engineering, something like that. Like, but why? For what? Like, what are we trying to do? Like, why is that important right now? And they'll often be like, well, we want to we want to, improve this part and we want to add this new feature. And I'm like, but why?
Mhm.
But why? Like, what do we like? And it ends up because I think a lot of the time it really is founders just saying, like in their heads, like, I think this would be cool. So I want to add that on and they'll be successful. Like, what evidence do you have? And that's going to be the thing that unlocks that next stage of growth.
Cool. And even if you do know what that like unlocking is, communicate that. Like that's what they
Right.
want to invest in versus like you're just going to deploy funds to like to bring on people, right? It's like, well, you need to connect that dot for like, what does that do for you and actually moving the venture forward and getting to that next decision point that continues the growth of the venture.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. I was having that very same like conversation in a like to kind of tie this like into the sales thing as well with the founder the other day, last week, that where it was like what was what we were actually trying to get to, is that these like if we're able to crush this set of pilots, that's going to lead to the set of contracts that we can then use. And we won't have the revenue right now, but the contracts we sign, and those contracts can be what allows us to raise that next round. Right. So that's what we're going to get to is like, well, we're going to get to these, like it's those contracts. And then when we have those, that's our justification for the seed round. Right. That was sort of what we were trying to get to. But it took a really long time to get there because a lot of it was wrapped up in I want to fund this pilot, these people, and then like I want to for that I want to put the money into product and add these new features and do all that. And like getting through all this like mess there just seems like we're just kind of shooting in the dark here, burning cash, as opposed to saying, well, we actually want to do at the end of the day is like we want to sell these particular large institutions on in order to do that we have to run a pilot for them. We'll have an LOI based on the pilot. In order to run that pilot, we actually need these small set of additional features here, and that leads us to right now, right? And we already have these relationships, in place with those features. We don't have to find them; we know who they are, right? So on that point, you just think all the pieces are on the table. Here's a clear plan, and as long as that plan is coherent, compelling, and makes sense, then I think you can raise off that.
Agreed. Well said.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time together here, but would not be an episode of Zero Traction
without frivolous thoughts.
Frivolous thought. I'm really wondering what the AI is going to do with that. So frivolity with our frivolousness. Do you got?
Sure. Yeah. I'll continue. You've heard me bring in from time to time. Yeah, Sacramento Kings saga that we're experiencing this year. This was a big week, or I guess weekend of trades. So I imagine you saw the Luka and Anthony Davis trade. So of course the Lakers, I believe came out on top on that trade. But as a proud Kings fan, hurts to see them kind of bring on a potential game changer for them. But as we look at the Kings, sad to see Fox be traded away, but it seemed like he was kind of wanting out as well. Yeah, I'm not sure how this trade. So I guess we'd be curious for those Zero to Traction listeners that are fans and been following this to see the Fox leave and then Levine coming in, who I think could be a superstar. I think the biggest risk is kind of the injury component for me, and so it's kind of I knew something needed to take place. Was this the one that's going to catalyze us into the next positive era of Kings basketball? Hopefully, but we will see. So only time can tell. But I'll be supporting them this evening, so we'll see them take on the Timberwolves, and hopefully they bring home a dub and get back on the right side of the, I guess the standings here. So
if you guys out there have thoughts and comments on this trade, definitely throw those into the comments on Substack. And if not, you have no thoughts on that, simply drop in the light the beam.
Yeah, light the beam. Yeah,
just drop it in the chat. Boom, boom. We'll be all right with that. So I actually I probably should have, but I'm not prepped enough to do it. But for my little bonus thought, had gone a little bit into the trade itself because it was a three-way, and those aren't as common, and they're much complicated deals. And I actually going to do something super interesting with that. But I'm ill prepared to talk about that. So I would just tell y'all as a bonus, a freebie.
Yeah, there is a lot to it for sure.
Yeah, pretty interesting. But putting that aside, I think for me, I'll say I'll continue with my own little theme here. I've started two new TV shows, and I have not committed to either. I mean, and so that sounds like I'm about to make it
you're cheating on them when you watch the other one.
No, I've actually always been someone who bounces back and forth between 4 or 5 shows. I've never been like
4 or 5.
Yeah, I've never anything with Brooks. I don't. It might be. Yeah, I know. My wife definitely prefers to like, let's just watch this one all the way through. I'm like, no, we'll watch one episode of this and then we'll turn on another show. And we don't do that more because we have a toddler. But so anyway, so like now I'm back to, I guess, being in the middle of two different shows that going to take me months to finish because I don't watch so much TV anymore. But anyway, the two show. I'm watching the second season finally of The Rings of Power, which is the Lord of the Rings universe show on Amazon. Speaking of interesting business there, like the amount that Amazon paid the Tolkien family for rights, which was like it was basically a prepayment of 5 seasons of Question. Like that was the deal. And so who knows? That's Rings of Power or Rings of the Universe. But kind of interesting. Anyway, so I was in the second season. I've only watched one episode of it, but I started watching. Yeah, super hot, like hot recognized, very creative.
Like each episode, like 5 hours long, or
Each episode is a solid hour long, and it's not slow paced. The show's not anyway. Like so, if and again, based on a sample size of one, it looks like the second season is going to be basically like the first, and that this like there's moments of action, and it's definitely interesting and it's fascinating. It's very visually appealing, but it's slow to develop. And like there's a lot going on, but it burns real slow. But I would set it up as almost like in opposition to like Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Hobbit, which I thought was slow in the bad way. You know, because like he took what was essentially like a short novel, because The Hobbit was one short novel, unlike like Lord of the Rings, there's three long novels, right? And so turning that into three movies still required legal blot you know.
Yeah.
But taking The Hobbit, which was a short thing, and like expanding it into 3 3-hour movies, that was a big expensive. But Rings of Power doesn't feel like that. It's super rich and super robust, but I think that's not for everybody. But anyways, like I'm actually pretty intrigued, but like it's gonna take a lot to get into, and you got to be awake to watch a show like that. So there's that. The second one though that is that I think is interesting that I'll give you a free recommendation here called The Fit. It's a new medical drama by John Wells, who was the EP on ER for a while and a writer there, as well as on The West Wing. And it actually stars Noah Wiley, who was Dr. Carter in the original ER for a number of years. So even though the character is very different in the show, it's a medical drama, but they're taking this like really odd approach where it's like, I think it's 15 episode season. It hasn't all been released yet. It's a brand new show. But that HBO is dropping as if it were on television for reasons passing understanding. But anyway, they basically take like one 15-hour shift in a busy Pittsburgh hospital, that's the Pitt, and take each episode as 1 hour of that shift. So it's basically like in real time, and it's not following the same person the whole time, but it's centered on one character. So it's a really interesting approach for medical drama. It's not like it's nothing like you watch the like Grey's Anatomy and stuff like that, which are like those are workplace dramas, but not strictly a medical drama. But so I don't want to make of it yet. Certainly very well done. The acting and the writing are quite good. I think it has potential to be a great show. But the first episode left me wondering, like, is this going to turn into something?
Well, that's a good versus I don't want to watch this anymore.
Yeah, the default for me. I will walk out of the theater. But yeah. So you watched anything or?
We're watching Modern Family all the way through. So I think we watched a good chunk on Saturday. So we had some good chuckles. Phil, he's a funny cat for sure. So yeah.
Nice. Well, cool. Well, that'll be the end of the show here. If you stuck with an unusually long segment of Frivolous Talk, so thank you for that. For out there and founder Jason's friends, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and the whole thing. So thank you for that. Really appreciate you guys spending. It's going to amount to like 40 minutes with us. So thank you for doing that. Really appreciate it. Yeah. Podcast grow by word of mouth. Say it every time. So be sure to like, subscribe wherever you like. Subscribe, leave a comment wherever you comment, wherever you socialize your media, socialize this episode.
There we go.
Get it out there. Really, really helps us out. Help work on the scale. And if you got any thoughts on this episode or any ideas for future episodes, definitely either, if you're on Substack, you can just throw right in the comments there, or you can send us an email. All that is available in the show as well.
Awesome.
Cameron,
Cool.
thanks for joining.
Yeah,
Thanks for
hey,
hosting.
there we go. We're back in the studio, and yeah, appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Peace.